Hello everyone, welcome to Tactica, Imperialis and to today's video. If you're looking for a lesson this week as part of my Tutorialis series, I'm afraid you're not going to find one. At the moment I am moving house. In fact, this is the last video you will see with this backdrop, so there will not be a lesson this week. I haven't had time, I apologise. But I wanted to get a video out, so I've decided to do an Age of Sigmar video, that being a Lumineth Realm-Lords Battletome review. A couple of weeks ago, I did an unboxing of the Lumineth Realm-Lords Army box. I'll leave a link in the description if you want to go and have a look at it. And it contained the limited edition Battletome, currently the only edition Battletome, because the main book and the main army are not out yet. And a few people were quite interested in the idea of doing a review. I sort of tossed the idea around while I was doing the unboxing, and a few of you seemed quite receptive. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go through the book, and I'm going to talk about some of the things I like about it, some of the things I don't like about it, and a little bit of the gameplay stuff in terms of combos, the equipment you have available to you. It will not be comprehensive, but it should at least give you a start. But before we do that, I should put a couple of caveats on what we're doing. First off, I have no experience playing with this army at all, because A, most of the models aren't out yet, and B, not many people are playing games at the moment. We're still coming out of lockdown in the UK, and most gaming stores are not open for gaming. They're trading, but they're not doing games. So I have no gameplay experience with this army, and whilst I have a lot of lore experience with the elves, I can't claim to be perfect. The second thing is, there is very little data on this army that we can go with. As already mentioned, the world is still coming out of lockdown following everything that's been going on, and as a result, there's not been many taken place where people can actually record data for the Lumineth. The lack of about half to two-thirds of their model range is not helping. There's no Tekklus model, there's no Alarith models yet, so we have no competitive data on the Lumineth as an army. All of the builds that we've seen on the internet are theory crafted. There is no actual data to back up what works and what doesn't, aside from what's gone on in our heads. So just to caveat that, this is not going to be the one-size-fits-all, super-duper overpowered, how to build the perfect Lumineth army review. If you want that, you're going to probably have to wait a couple of months for another channel to do it, where someone who is actually a competitive player actually has the time. I'm not that person. But hopefully this will be a nice insight review, and I hope that you find it interesting, and let me know your thoughts when we get there in the comments. So, without further ado, let's get started. This is going to be my Lumineth Realm-Lords Battletome review. I'm going to break this review into two main sections. The lore, i.e. the backstory, and the gameplay. One section will probably be longer than the other, but that section will be less detailed for reasons I discussed in the introduction. But there is plenty in here to still sink our teeth into, and we're going to start with the backstory. So I'm not going to tell the whole tale of the Lumineth. I'd probably get yelled at, and there are better people on the internet who do it anyway. In fact, I might try and leave a link in the description to 2+ Tough, because they do excellent AOS lore, and I think they've done most, if not all, of the story. So a lot of this is mostly just laying out who the Lumineth are. They were the second, or maybe later, attempt of Tekklus to create elves after the Ideneth incident? Attempted genocide? I'm not sure what word I want to settle on with the Ideneth. And essentially, eventually, they ended up on the Lumineth. Very stable, very normal elves. And Tyrion and Tekklus were quite happy with this. The Lumineth went on to settle all of Hysh, eventually. But the Lumineth of the past, of the Age of Myth, are not the Lumineth of today. Not really. And that's because of an event known as the Spirefall. The Okari Dara, as the elves call it. So, in the Age of Myth, the Lumineth were obsessed with the idea of enlightenment. Hysh is a realm of knowledge and understanding and learning, and they had the idea of this thing called the Teklamentari. And the idea was that if you got higher up the ladder, the more knowledgeable you were, and it essentially formed the entire social academic ladder. Even those higher on the social ladder could be bossed around by those higher on the Teklamentari because of the importance of this enlightenment. And none of them even believed that Tekklus had reached the zenith of it. It was an idea, a concept. But in doing so, they became arrogant. They'd already started using ether quartz to store their emotions. They've been doing that for a long, long time. And eventually, they got too far. Intrigue and game playing turned to skullduggery and sabotage. The Lumineth climbed higher, forsaking sleep, seeing the business of rest as a waste of time. And so on and so forth. Over time, an insidious fever of pride took hold, with some openly attempting to outdo their rivals in all things. Others were subtler, casting aspersions at those who showed their excellence. Though none pointed it out directly, they went to great lengths to ensure their towers were taller and more grandiose, their robes whiter, their spells cleaner and more precise. It went on and on and on. And if you've heard the tale of the fall of the Eldari, then you're kind of going in the same direction. It's not the same story as the fall of the Eldari, but it's definitely drawing cues. And eventually all sorts of devices were developed. Super weapons, ultimate doom spells, and it was almost a case of mutually assured destruction. They were there, but they were never going to use them. They had no reason to. It was only if chaos ever showed up they were going to use them. But that's not how it happened. Tyrion and Tekklus took their eye off the ball. They were too busy dealing with Slaanesh, and the Lumineth went to war with each other. A massive civil war happened, and the super weapons were unleashed, and it was not fun. And the magical cataclysm became known as the Spirefall. With their abilities bolstered by the wholesale consumption of ether quartz, the elves used spells so destructive that they blasted apart palaces with a word, and worked arcane miracles so powerful they flattened entire districts. Cities were obliterated, rivers choked with the bodies of the dead. In places, reality ripped apart, and the realm of chaos poured through. Essentially, the elves caused their own downfall. Something that's very common across a lot of Warhammer literature. The elves doomed themselves. They ripped open reality in Hysh. They allowed the demons in, particularly the demons of Slaanesh, who had waited for elven pride to give them a way in, and they took it. The Age of Chaos came to Hysh, not through the machinations of the gods, not particularly, though Slaanesh is suggested to have had a hand in it. No, this was the elves' own fault. They caused it. Whether they caused the whole Age of Chaos across the other realms is less clear. I wouldn't rule it out, as the elves/Eldari ruining everything for everyone is a common trope in Warhammer literature at this point, but I can't confirm it. Either way, the elves ruined themselves. They ruined Hysh. We got a nice little map of Hysh here, the Tyrionic and Teklian hemisphere. I'll talk about this in a moment. But what went on after that is Tyrion and Tekklus came back. Tyrion led the defense. He's a military leader. He always was. Whether he was the chosen of, he was the last of an Aryan's line, wielding the Widowmaker as the avatar of Cain, whatever he was in the end times, he was a superlative warrior. And he led the defenses of Hysh, but they were going to lose. Realistically, they were going to lose. And Tekklus went to have a chat to the moon. He tried doing all sorts of things. He spoke to everything to try and get an answer. And in the end, he went and spoke to the moon. Tekklus spent a month doing that, and eventually Selenar came with him, the avatar of Hysh, the living moon of Hysh given life. And the two of them, they implemented what we call the Elementary. Is that right? Not the Teklementari, the other one. I'm trying to find its name just to remind. I think it's the Elementary. Yes, Elementary. Essentially, the elves started to beg Hysh for forgiveness. We blew you up and we let demons in. Please forgive us. That's broadly what the Elementary is. And that's where the Alarith come from. It's where the temples of water, of the Zenith, and of the Peak come from, as well as the Temple of the Mountain. There are 4 main Elementary temples. We only get to meet the Temple of the Mountain in this book, which is a shame. But in essence, the elves learned humility in the hardest way possible. Hysh killed many of them, and many Alarith want-to-bees are killed by the mountains they go to forgive, or go to speak to for forgiveness. But eventually, it was enough. The wars of reinvention happened. The Lumineth overcame their demons within and without, and became one with Hysh. It's not fun. And there are some among the elves of Ulgu who say that the Elementary is simply swapping one obsession for another. The Teklamentari, the Elementary. One was the obsession with enlightenment, the other is linked to the bonds with Hysh and pleading with the elements. So some say that the Lumineth have just swapped one problem for another, but that's who they are now. So it's an interesting bit of backstory. I'm not going to go through the whole bestiary or all the maps and all of that. It's very interesting stuff, and I'll get on to the Lumineth's current state in a moment. But the first thing I want to focus on is this. So this is Hysh. Welcome to Hysh. This is the Realm of Light. So the armies you can play as with the Lumineth Realm-Lords are divided up by great nations, indicated by this map. Syar, Iliatha, Ymetrica, Zytrek, Alumnia, Helon, Orathrai, and Occultrai. I probably butchered the pronunciation there. However, you are only allowed to have an army from these four. The Teklian Hemisphere. These four, the Tyrionic Hemisphere, are not in the book. The four great nations of Ultrai, Orathrai, Helon, and Alumnia are heavily militarized, more given to the Tyrionic notions of brilliance, swiftness of action, emanation of energy, and pure, unalloyed skill. And there's mention in here of the Tyrionic Hemisphere containing armies with chariots, war machines, and artillery, and more units that the Lumineth don't have. And this makes me think that the Tyrionic Lumineth are going to be a separate faction one day. I can't confirm it, but that's my theory, because we've only seen these four. Zintil is the center of the realm, and Hyzia, I can never pronounce that correctly, is the realm's edge, and nobody goes there because you die. So, well, Tyrion and Tekklus can go there, and it explains why Tyrion went blind in there, but that's the Lumineth army now. This has not been touched yet. Interesting future possibilities. So that's where the Lumineth have come from. It also talks a bit about how Tyrion and Tekklus came to be. So Tyrion awoke first, went blind looking for Tekklus on the realm's edge, found him. Actually, no, he didn't. He sort of woke up back at the start, back in the center of Hysh, and Tekklus' body was just there. They went to look for more elves, couldn't find them. Met Malerion in Shaish, and the four of them, along with Morathi, went on to ensnare Slaanesh, stuff we've seen before. Confirms that Tyrion and Tekklus can't go to Ulgu, and Malerion can't go to Hysh. Morathi is not confirmed at this time, and that's why they use Ulgish, the hidden gloaming, as their meeting place. So that's where the Lumineth came from, and I honestly think it's a really nice backstory. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the most super original thing in the world of race climbs too high, pushes itself to its limits, then turns on itself and unleashes its own inner and outer demons. It's not the most original plotline in the world, and whilst it's not as close to the fall of the Eldari as I was concerned about, it's certainly not exactly original as a origin story. But bonding with the elements is a new take on the elves. They've never done that before. Sure, the White Lions take their inspiration from the beasts they hunted. The Phoenix Guard renounced their lives and took a vow of silence from knowing they would die. It's different, and it's a nice different direction to take the elves in, and opens up these four temples as possible options for future units. So what do the elves of the river look like? What do the elves of the peak look like? How do they fight? What do they use? Do we have mounted flying elves on winged beasts? Do we have water wizards who can sort of do kind of Idoneth-like tricks? We don't know, and it's a nice place to leave them as a backstory to go forward. However, there is one glaring hole, and it comes up actually not from the lore, but from this. Talked about this before in my unboxing. The Alliance Matrix. Lumineth are allowed to ally with Idoneth according to their Battletome. And there is no in-book explanation for how they can do this. None. The only mentions the Idoneth get, there's a couple of them, and they primarily relate to the disappearance of the Idoneth. God enchained, the first to be rescued, the Idoneth flee their maker's wrath to the bottom of the oceans, and they're never mentioned again. In this entire section, they are never mentioned again, I don't think. I'd have to triple check, but they pretty much never come up. And we know that Tyrion saved them from Tekklus. That's about it. So why can they ally? Especially when in the General's Handbook, they are desperate allies at best. It's not good. I don't understand it, and I really need an explanation. They may have explained it on the Stormcast podcast that Phil Kelly did this week. I think it was Phil Kelly. But I haven't had a chance to watch that. So if someone has seen that and it does say, do let me know. I'd be curious. Final bit of plot to discuss is where the Lumineth are going. So, why have we not seen the Lumineth before now, and why are we seeing them now? So, eventually, the Lumineth got Hysh under control. They have pretty much sorted it. They've rebuilt and sanctified Hysh. They created these great runes of warding on the ground using their magic and sealed Hysh, essentially preventing demons from pouring through like they had done in the past in the Age of Chaos. So they sealed off the realms, or they sealed off the realm from the realm of chaos. But they were not able to get ready for the Necroquake. They saw it coming, but they weren't able to stop it or really do much but mitigate the effects on Hysh. The majority of them had a little bit of warning and preparation, but the backlash meant that many of the spells they cast became sentient, and the wastes of Hysh were now prowled by predatory magical entities. And it had a huge effect on the Lumineth psyche, and they couldn't trust the other realms to look after themselves. Before, they were quite happy to keep Hysh to themselves. They were quite isolationist. They actually use the word isolationism here. Maybe not Idoneth levels, but they were isolationist. They kept to themselves. The other realms will look after themselves. We'll look after Hysh. That was no longer an option. Especially when the four gods, I'm counting Morathi as a god, she's technically not, met to discuss Slaanesh. And Morathi was insistent that Slaanesh was going to get out. Eventually. Tyrion and Malerion brushed her off. But Tekklus listened, and he thought, actually, yeah, you're probably right. He had a long chat with Selenar, he thought she had a point, and so he decided that he was going to take action. I'll read it verbatim. The Lumineth would go out into the mortal realms and seal those sites where reality thinned, shoring up its defences as they had in Hysh. They would make it so that the demons of Slaanesh and its brothers in darkness could no more break through their wards than a shoal of ripjaws could swim through a dam of obstinite. It was a noble endeavour, but would prove to have a great many complications. Those complications being that they did it everywhere, and there are stories in here of them doing it in the middle of cities, and thus immolating everything that gets in their way. They have successfully alienated everyone. The cities of Sigmar have been alienated. Everywhere they go, they smash, they destroy the enemy, and then they do their sealing right. And if the forces of order get in their way, then they burn. Tyrion tried to stop Tekklus, but he failed. Tekklus would not be persuaded, because Tekklus in this book is very stubborn and borderline an idiot. I don't know if he's a total idiot, but he's borderline an idiot, because he's just so self-centered. It's like, I am right. I am going to do this. This will work. He did it to the Idoneth, and he's done it again here. He gets it right sometimes, but he's not very good at people skills. Let's just say that. So it's an interesting way to justify the Lumineth's lack of alliances, and it leaves the door open again for Tyrion's armies to come in and do things very differently, which I'm looking forward to if we get that in the future. So I realise that I've already talked for about nearly 20 minutes just about the plot. So as a final summary of it then, it's good stuff. It is. It's good plot. It sets up the Lumineth as a very unique race that will work on their own. They've still got the elven characteristics of arrogance, isolationism. They still feel like elves, but they do have their own flavour in the fact that they now work with the elements rather than simply harnessing the magic of the elements for themselves, because when they did that, well, the Spirefall happened, and having the elves be the architect of their own downfall is thematic. It feels appropriate, certainly more than it would if, say, the Duarden had done it, or the humans had done it. It feels appropriate. And they've left the door open for the other temples of the River, the Peak, and the Zenith, and they've also left the door open for a Tyrionic army that can harness those elements, as well as add new units, such as charioteers or artillery. So I think there's plenty more elves to come in the future, but I do feel there's a bit of detail missing. So, for example, the story of this book ends when when Tekklus leaves Hish and goes to war. There are no real events that take place after that. We have no confirmation of how Tekklus and Sigmar get on after Sigmar's treachery of the penumbral engines was revealed. We've got a lot of things in the air, and I feel like that a story, a expansion like Wrath of the Everchosen or something would really benefit these guys in solidifying their role in the rest of the realms. How do they interact with the other races? When they run across a force of humans, do they just say, get out of our way if you know what's good for you? Or is there a parley? Has Tekklus been to see Sigmar? Is Tyrion trying to act as the great peace broker across the entire Pantheon, trying to reach out to Alariel, Tekklus, Sigmar, and pull it all together to refound the Pantheon of Order? We're not sure yet. And I think we will need a bit more detail, but it's a good baseline. As a Battletome goes, it's a good baseline, it's a great backstory, and it sets them up nicely for the future. Now that we've done the lore, I'm going to just quickly hang on for a second, and then we're going to talk about how the army performs. So we're going to have a brief look at the allegiance abilities, we're going to have a quick flick through some of their other abilities, and I'm going to give some general thoughts about how I think the army performs. So, gameplay. The Lumineth army is very different to many armies, particularly at the higher end of Age of Sigmar, as far as I'm led to understand it. They are a very elite army, they're quite expensive, many of you will have seen their points costs available on the internet by now, and they have a very different play style to what is generally considered a high-tier build. In terms of abilities, we know about their lightning reactions. This was seen on Warhammer Community that allows 2 units at a time to fight in the combat phase. However, you cannot use it to get units that strike last to not strike last, and you can't use it to make 2 units auto strike first. So if there are other abilities in play, they supersede the lightning reactions. The Ether Quartz Reserves is their other main ability. Every unit gets one, and once per phase, 1 unit can use it at the cost of -1 bravery for the rest of the game. And you've got 4 different abilities. Add 1 to save, add 1 to hit, add 1 to cast or re-roll that cast, or cast 1 extra spell, because most of your army is wizards. Even your infantry are wizards if you have a big enough unit. However, this -1 bravery can be offset by using the hero known as the Cenari Cathalar, which is the one with the veil and the bowl. I got an image of them lying around. See if I can find a big image. Yeah, that one there. The one with the weird veil that we saw, I think, in Preview 3. You can choose Great Nations, Ymetrica, Sayar, Iliatha, and Zytrek, and each of them takes a different route. So Ymetrica wants to go down an Alarith build. These are Tekklus's lot. They are absolutely all about the Alarith, which is the mountain stuff, so the Hammer Elves, the big battle cattle, the spirits of the mountain, and the Stone Mage. That's their main gimmick. Sayar are all about Ether Quartz. They can use 2 Ether Quartz per unit, and you can use 2 Ether Quartz per phase at the cost of a command point. Iliatha is probably my favourite. These guys are all about the Venari. That's the infantry, the spearmen, the archers, and the cavalry dawn riders. They all get the ability to double stack their command abilities, and the command ability you can give them is reroll ones to hit. So you can very easily pass around command abilities along your line simply by having lots of Venari, or by having a couple of big blocks of spearmen. Both of them can benefit from the command ability. However, you only get to do this once per phase. Zytrek is the magical nation. So they get better casting rolls, they know extra spells, they get more unbinds, and they have the ability to synergize with Tekklus to get an invulnerable save of sorts, a save after save roll, as their primary relic, and they also get a unique spell, which is actually quite good. Halve the move of a unit, and if you can roll higher than its save, then do D3 mortal wounds as well. Against certain armies, I can see that having a lot of use. I'm not going to troll through all the relics. So you've got Venari bits, you've got Cenari bits, Alarith bits, spells for different people. Probably the only one that's worth really stressing is the Shining Company. So this is the Venari's rule that says if you set up a Venari unit with the base of each model touching 2 or more bases of other models, that unit gets a Shining Company, which means that as long as they stay like that after they move, your opponent is at -1 to hit them all the time. But you can't run, you can't charge, and your pile-in is much reduced. So, early game, you're giving up a lot of movement if you play with the Shining Companies, but you will be a lot better on defense. And your cavalry can use this, for example, to defend themselves on the first turn or two, then break the Shining Company as they move and go in for the hard charge because they're no longer in company. The Alarith get some Ren negation, and they also get a small boop, which is quite nice. You can bump a unit by 2 inches, and then you can pile in with your Alarith, sort of allowing you to shift a battle line backwards, allowing you to push enemies off of objectives if you know what you're doing. And that's sort of how the Lumineth play. The Lumineth are a very defensive army, which is odd to say for elves. And if you look at their stats, you'd probably be thinking, Tactica, what are you on about? How is this army defensive? They're elves, for crying out loud. Well, as much as their units are not that tough, 1 wound, 4 up save, shields do nothing, for the Orlan Wardens, it is very easy to get their stats up by a lot. If they are charged, then they get +1 to wound and -1 rend, taking their standard weapons to 3/3, rend 1, damage 1, and they have an ability to do a mortal wound every time they roll an unmodified 6 to hit. They also have a spell that allows that to go up to a 5+. So with a 3-inch reach, your block of 30 elves will be making something like 50 attacks, where a third of them do an automatic mortal wound, and the rest of them will be wounding on 3s with rend -1. You can also then use your Ether Quartz to get yourself a 3+ save. You can use the command ability of, say, Iliatha to give themselves rerolls of 1s to hit. There is also Tekklus' signature spell, I'll talk about Tekklus in a moment, which is an aura of a 5+ wound negation, which is a really powerful spell. So suddenly your line can be exceptionally tanky for elves. I'm not going to say they're the tankiest things in the world. And then if you add the Stone Guard, who have got the extra wound, which is the big thing, or you're playing your Metrica, where they get ignore rend -2, then suddenly your army becomes very, very difficult to shift. But, particularly if you're playing a Venari build, it will cost you in terms of your maneuverability. Lumineth are not fast. They can run in an Alarith build, and the cavalry are move, 14? Yeah, they are move 14, so they're not slow. And elves at move 6 are never slow. But Shining Companies can't run. And Venari want to get charged. Well, the spearmen do. The cavalry really want the charge, and they're really good at crunching through light infantry. But the Alarith don't care. The Spirit of the Mountain, the big battle cow, is only move 6. It's really slow at movement 6. But 12 wounds and a 3-up save for the base version, 14 wounds and a 3-up save for the unique version of the Stoneheart King. they're not an army that I think that are going to rely on speed to win games, and that's going to hurt them. Because a lot of armies in Age of Sigmar are very fast or are very good at shooting. One of the most obscene lists of the moment is a Seraphon list involving salamanders. And that list is so unfair at shooting that it's not even funny. I was told about it and immediately wanted to dropkick it off a building. It's not fun, it's not fair, and I think that it's probably in for a heavy nerf following the FAQ that will precede the General's Handbook that just came out. I suspect it's going to get slapped very hard with the nerf bat, but they're not the only army. Some armies are very heavy on magic, like the Legions of Nagash or the Ossiarch Bone Reapers, who are much better at that tanky build because they can run and they get back up again. In short, the Lumineth are kind of like many elves. They're not quite jack of all trades, master of none, but I don't think they're the best in the game at anything. If you want a slow-moving, tanky army with lots of magic, go play Ossiarch. Because no matter how powerful Tekklus is, and he is, because he auto-casts up to 4 spells on a casting value of 10, including nuke everything within 18 inches and guard everything within 18 inches, and also he's not that bad in terms of having 4, he has an auto-dispel scroll, I think. Does he have a dispel scroll? I think he does, hang on. So he gets an aura of +1 to cast Dispel and Unbind. He can automatically dispel an endless spell and do an auto unbind on an enemy spell. And he can ignore... friendly units within initially 16 inches of him can be ignoring spells on a 4+ and doing mortal wounds back. Tekklus is an insanely powerful wizard. He is, he should be. But in terms of raw volume of spells, Nagash has got more spells and I think gets better casting bonuses. So he'll actually out-magic Tekklus. He costs 800 and some at points, but he will. He'll out-magic Tekklus. Tekklus will out-magic everyone else, but he's got a 4-up save. And the only way to get a save after save is his own spell, which can be unbound unless you decide to only cast 1 spell in the entire turn, which you really don't want to do. He's flimsy by God standards. I'm comparing to Nagash, Alariel, and the like here. He's flimsy. And he'll be out-magicked by some of them. You want a tank army? Play Ossiarch. You want an army that's really slow and defensive and hard to hit? Play Plague Bearers, who get an army aura of -2 to hit on a block of 30 Plague Bearers. It is insufferable. You want an army that's a good beat stick? I could show you 17 billion configurations of different lists. You want to play a shooting army? Go play Seraphon. Go play Stormcast. In fact, go play Stormcast if you want maneuverability and defense as well, because they have got the speed and can teleport, which Lumineth can't. In short, I think Lumineth are going to be really interesting to play with. As an army, I think that their specialism is in walk up the board. Imagine this is a board from... Actually, no, I'll close the book. Imagine this is a board. Your Lumineth want to take mid-board and then have your opponent run into them. They want to get to mid-board, defend, and blast the opponent's army until the opponent says, screw it, I'm just going to have to try and kill them the old-fashioned way, at which point your Orlan Wardens go, thank you for coming, bang, and take you out with their super powerful spears, their Ether Quartz bonuses, other spells, other command abilities, and they just blast you. Because that's what the Lumineth do in lore. They walk forward, they blast you with magic and archers, force you to charge them, and then spears block, cavalry pincer, very classic military tactics, actually. I think it's classical military tactics. I'd have to do a bit more historical research, but it feels very classic military. Like, very old school, like Roman Greek military. Shoot, 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 bring the enemy into you, absorb the charge with your infantry, cavalry mop them up. Just add magic instead of artillery. Same idea. But that won't work for most games. In an objective-based game, if your opponent is, say, Idoneth Deepkin, who can swarm you to about here, you've lost. Because you've got no way of getting to here to claim the backfield objectives aside from running. And if your opponent knows what they're doing, your cavalry will be picked off in 3 seconds flat, and you'll have no way of doing that without breaking your Shining Companies and your Phalanxes and losing the game. You want to play an Alarith build? Okay. Enjoy an army where your basic infantry costs 20 points a model, though admittedly that is a very tanky 20 points a model. And again, you have no maneuverability. You're move 6 and you've got to just slog it on foot. But that's not to say they're bad. Everything I've said so far makes me think, it might make you think, oh, so Lumineth suck, right? No. I think Lumineth are going to be an army that is very unfun to new players. I think they're going to be one of the classic gatekeeper armies to newer players who are going into competitive. Because if Lumineth get their combos off, get their spearmen doing the thing, if they're in their battalion, you get a bunch of extra mystic shield, eventually, on your entire phalanx, and get their ether quartz going off right, a well-piloted Lumineth army can beat most anyone if it does its job right. But a well-piloted something else has a good chance of beating a well-piloted Lumineth army because they don't quite have the mastery of any particular phase, and Sigmar is not a game that rewards patiently camping with a line of combat infantry while your archers shoot over their heads at the enemy. It works, it definitely works, and I think if piloted correctly, it will be very, very dangerous. But is it going to win a tournament? I don't think it's got the power required to do that. And I'm saying this despite having never seen them at tournaments, obviously because no one's really taken them yet because we don't have all the models. We're missing a lot of data, but in a lot of the theory crafting and number crunching that's gone on, the common consensus is they're good, but they're not tier 1. I've sort of said they're probably a mid to high tier 2 army, in that they can beat most people, but a well-piloted meta list will probably be very challenging to defeat. That's sort of where I rest on the Lumineth in terms of power. Does that mean they're going to be boring? No. Does that mean they're going to be unplayable? No, not at all. And some of the builds I've seen are either going very heavy on the cavalry, or the Alarith, or even going on a big infantry block. Every unit in this book appears to be usable. Tekklus seems to be exceptionally usable, though no one can quite decide whether he's the best unit in the book or too expensive for his cost. There's sort of a bit of argument about how powerful relative to his cost and fragility Tekklus actually is. But the army works. It does exactly what it wants to do, and it does it very well. But it will be outclassed on a game that requires high speed if it's running infantry, and high defense if it's running against an army such as Ossiarch or Nurgle. They will lose a grind war. Slowly, but they'll lose it. They don't have the speed to beat armies like Idoneth or maybe fast teleporting Stormcast, and I don't think they have the tankiness to beat a Petrifex elite army. They don't have the magic to stop Nagash, and I think they have the punch to beat most armies, just not the best piloted and best built ones. But that's just my opinion. Overall, though, I'm definitely going to play a Lumineth army, and as I quite like that classical style of warfare from the old Total War games and things like that, I'll definitely use them and enjoy that playstyle. Given they have Idoneth allies, at least for now, I think they'll really benefit from things like Leviatons, recyclable infantry in the Namati, and even the extra speed of something like an Alapex or the Eels, the Achelian Guard. I think they'll benefit from the Idoneth greatly as allies, because it covers one of their main deficiencies, a lack of speed in particular. So we've got a lot here to dive into, and I'm sure, hopefully, you've got some ideas. If you want to go and look up all the points costs and individual things, that's not what this is for. This is just a my thoughts on type review rather than a full intricate deep dive, which is why I've not been here for 2 hours. So there you go. That is the Lumineth Realm-Lords Battletome review. A promising story that leaves a lot of room open for development, both in terms of new units, new factions, and new storylines, because it doesn't explore them in full. We also get a set of gameplay mechanics that are very effective when piloted correctly, though maybe not to the level of being completely unbeatable, though I do suspect that there'll be some people who will pop up, particularly the sort of casual players who face them and go, well, that was very unfun, they just shot me off the board and then stamped me when I charged them. I can see them being very unfun in the wrong hands, and almost unhandleable if you don't know what you're doing. If you do know what you're doing, though, I think they are definitely in the right level of manageable. But that is, of course, just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. What do you think of the story of the Lumineth? From what I've told you or from what you've read elsewhere? What do you think of them gameplay-wise? Have you theory crafted a sort of build that you think works really well? Where do you think they'll fall in the competitive meta? At least talking pre-General's Handbook. Of course, we're now coming off the back of a huge number of points changes, and there's more to come for the armies that are too recent for the Handbook. So everything from Cities of Sigmar onwards. So where do you think they're going to fall once those changes have happened? I'll be very interested to see what you think. Also, let me know what you think of this whole review format. I own practically every AOS Battletome because I always like to read the stories. So let me know what you think in the comments about me doing more reviews in the future. I'd be very interested to give that a go, particularly for some of my favourite armies. So let me know with all of that in the comments. For now, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis. This has been my Lumineth Realm-Lords Battletome review. I'll see you all again. Bye for now.